The morning I killed my first priest, the basilica bells did not ring. The absence of sound felt like a verdict. I had been assigned to the basements for 3 years, wearing a badge that read Vatican security. People assume the subterranean wards are about safekeeping. They imagine climate control and catalogs. They are wrong. The stone smells of beeswax, iron, and a medicinal tang that clings to cuffs. We moved like shadows with a logic of records. They called our unit Arma Sacra. The name sounded grand, but in practice it was procedural. Fathers and laymen formed the apparatus. We were custodians of consequence. On my first night, a leather manual appeared at my bench. It contained pages of names and statuses, dates and familial ties. A spirali seal, stamped in red wax, repeated across margins. Photographs were folded between leaves like evidence. The ledger treated people as entries. That was the training. Orders came by sealed envelope or quiet memo. My assignment arrived before dawn, slid beneath the prefect's heavy door. The flap bore a cipher I recognized from other files. The instruction was terse. Contain. Transfer. Silence. A priest in a provincial seminary had lectured about a manuscript the office preferred shuttered. The tape had leaked. The directive requested removal. It did not say murder. We learned euphemism as a craft. Pietro, the man who oversaw my circuits, handed me a photograph and a small token etched with the spiral eye. The picture was taken through glass and the priest looked away from the lens. On the back someone had written too loud. My hands trembled. We do not call what we do killing in a way that implies finality. We call it removal, containment, mitigation. The ledger economizes language so conscience can bargain. Preparation is methodical. We do not improvise. Engineering files a harmless work order. Maintenance logs an inspection. Signatures are obtained. Witness slips are stacked. The scaffold for inspection was set to fail. Within narrow parameters. A harness release set to surrender under specific load. The drop had to read like an accident and feel inevitable to anyone not looking for design. I watched the priest in the cloister as he prayed, hands folded, voice low. Moonlight carved the stones like old bone. For a moment I imagined mercy and then dismissed it like an impractical margin note. The scaffold jerked. He fell. The hospital report later listed blunt trauma and a slipped harness. The prefect circled the ledger entry and wrote, "Case closed." He stamped my photograph into the file and attached a neat code. I returned the coin to my pocket. It was cold and heavy, warm with the memory of the ledger. That night I washed my hands until the water ran red in memory. I told myself tidy records and clean signatures preserved order. I was young and obedient then. I was wrong. The ledger keeps accounts. It does not make a thing right anymore. They did not baptize us with water. They marked us with procedure. After my first removal, I was called into a small room behind the prefect's office. Cabinets of seals lined the walls. Pietro sat at a plain desk with 2 lamps and a stack of forms. He did not look like a man who argued about conscience. He looked like someone practiced in quiet erasures. On the desk sat a metal token, the spiral eye carved across its face. Pietro slid it toward me and said the word they used, sigillum. He explained the sigillum bound a person to a ledger. It made a removal legible across departments. When I held the coin, its chill went up my wrist. I slipped it into my palm and felt the weight of record-keeping settle in my hand. The marking followed. They said a token alone could not carry authority. My right forearm was laid on a stone slab. A small instrument hummed. The technician drew a thin line of ink, then pressed a heated stamp until heat moved under my skin. The sigillum took. The impression glowed faintly, like a memory through bone. They told me the mark was for identification and for accountability. Training continued. We practiced containment and language. There were forms that read like prayers, witness slips, coded memos. We learned to make accidents look natural and to file truth into margins where it would be overlooked. Simulations were clinical. We repeated procedures until muscle anticipated thought. The curriculum taught efficiency and moral distance. Taught how to make absence tidy. They fed me dry bread and poured wine after the ceremony. A printed justification was passed to me, stamped in red. My name headed the page as if paper needed my consent to include me. I signed where the script requested affirmation. The prefect nodded and said loyalty lets the ledger rest. His voice was small and steady. Walking back through the basilica, I felt a new pressure in the air. Passing the nave, I sensed breath at the back of my neck. Stone echoed a sound I could not place. It was the rustle of wings folded in dark. I wrapped a scarf over the brand and tried to forget the sensation of the stamp's heat. I told myself the coin and the mark were instruments. Instruments do not decide. That night in the choir, a man looked at me with a gaze that lasted too long. He whispered a name I did not know, a syllable that felt like a knot. His eyes held recognition and a flash of fear. Later I learned what that look meant. For now I tucked the sigillum under my shirt and kept my head down. The ledger had given me a place. The heir, I suspected, had noticed. I would soon discover the ledger's records reached beyond men. They reached to things that kept vigil above graves, and they remembered names differently. After the mark, the work changed its rhythm. It did not become easier. It simply gained a bureaucratic clarity that made my hands move without asking my heart. Orders arrived stamped and folded, each wrapped in the same heavy paper that smelled faintly of wax and old ink. There was a cadence to the files. Complaint, review, authorization, action, closure. The prefect liked closure. The ledger liked tidy columns. My desk became a theater of slips. I learned to read a file the way others read a face. A maintenance report that insisted on a fraying harness was code. A hospitality invoice padded with medical supplies was suggestion. The photograph affixed to a case file was often the real instruction. It told us where to watch, when to be near, and what story to prepare for the coroner. We learned to file everything that could be filed, to bury the rest under seals and cross-references. One morning a file with a red ribbon appeared without my name on it. It bore the notation urgent and a stamp I had seen rarely. Priority, signature required. I opened it behind the screen of my lamp and found a stack of papers and a single photograph, its edges blurred from handling. The photograph showed a narrow cloister and in the frame the same priest I had watched on that first night. He was lower in the image than before, closer to the ground he would not leave unmarked. On the back someone had written a word, too loud. The authorization form below bore my signature line. I walked to Pietro's room with the file tucked under my arm as if carrying a fever. He inspected the papers with the calm of a man who had arranged worse things into tolerable record. He did not ask me if I was ready. He assumed consent the way the ledger assumed outcomes. He stamped the form and slid the seal across the desk so it clicked like a sentence ending. After an action there are reports. That is the ledger's mercy. The post-operation report was an exercise in language. It recounted the incident, catalogued the witnesses, recorded the explanation to be offered to curious auditors, and concluded with the phrase case closed. The priest's death was rendered into paragraphs. Fall from height, blunt force trauma, untimely accident. The photograph returned to the file and the coin in my pocket grew cool because the ledger absorbs heat like truth. But the world outside our forms behaved unpredictably. News traveled in fits. Parishioners wept. A candle vigil was held for the man we had removed. I watched from a shadowed side aisle as a woman pressed her forehead to a statue, whispering the sort of private supplications the ledger never polled. Her grief cut me more than any reprimand could. The act that read as administrative in the office was a catastrophe in a kitchen on a bench at a bedside. Paper will not feel the weight of a mother's hands. Then, on the third night after I signed the closure, I noticed a pattern I should have seen earlier. It began as an itch behind my ear, a sense that something watched from the high vaults. At first I blamed conscience. Later I learned to call it recognition. A shadow shifted where none should have been. A hymn faltered during vespers as if the choir had lost a note. The ledger had taken the priest and sealed his file, but the architecture above us remembered differently. Pietro told me in a voice made small by habit that certain removals provoke a response. He did not elaborate. He slid across a thin sheet of paper with a typed list. The header read Observed Effects. Below it were annotations. Dreams of falling, sudden chills, lights appearing at windows, a recurring motif of feathered shapes in the periphery of vision. I stared at the list until the letters blurred. Angels, he suggested without naming them, remember names differently than ledgers do. That is how my nights split. By day I filed and stamped and learned how to make absence look inevitable. By night I listened for a movement in the rafters, for something skimming across the stone like a thing counting prayers. My signature sat heavy in the binder. The ledger favored order, but the sky kept score with a patience no archive could match. I should have dismissed the signs. A cracked candle holder, a draft that smelled faintly of burning feathers, a hymn echoing long after. The choir had filed out. These were easy to rationalize. That is what the office trained us to do. Rationalization is the mortar between the bricks of secrecy. But one night the air changed in a way that was not architectural. It carried weight, a pressure that bent my shoulders and sharpened every corner of the dark. That was the night I saw the first wing. It happened in the archive room 2 levels below the basilica. I was alone, arranging files into the iron cabinets that clicked shut like jaws. The lamps burned low, their glass chimneys dusted with centuries. As I turned, a shadow moved independently of my own. It stretched upward, far too tall for a human frame, and when I looked closer I saw it was not shadow at all. It was something pale, almost luminous, bending like a sail in slow motion. A wing, enormous and silent, brushing against the vaults above. The rest of the form never came fully into view. The creature, or messenger, or executioner, remained half-hidden, as if it needed only to reveal one fragment of itself to make a point. The feathers carried a strange distortion, pulling at the edges of my vision until the room seemed to warp around them. My chest tightened, not from fear alone, but from recognition. Somewhere in the marrow of my bones I understood that this was a notice. The way a stamped document signaled closure, the wing was a signature of its own, an announcement from an order we did not control. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over a stack of case files. Pages spilled like confessionals, each one with its discreets and flattened into paragraphs. The wing did not vanish so much as it folded out of perception, retreating into a dimension just beyond the ordinary light. Silence followed, and in that silence my heartbeat sounded like an alarm. I gathered the scattered files with trembling hands, but one sheet caught my attention. It was not from the stack. It was too old, its ink browned, its corners eaten by time. The heading read, Incident Report, Room 99. No signature, no seal, only a final line scribbled by hand. They watch the watchers. I carried that paper back to my quarters, hiding it beneath the false bottom of my desk drawer. Pietro noticed my distraction the next morning. He said nothing, but when he handed me the day's file he placed his hand on it longer than usual, as though measuring my pulse through the paper. The file itself was ordinary, surveillance of a disobedient archivist, but the weight of his stare suggested he already knew what I had seen. That night, the wing returned. Not in the archive this time, but in my sleep. Dreams became corridors. Doors opened to reveal nothing but feathered edges and a rushing sound, like the collective intake of 1,000 breaths. A voice entered then, not with words, but with the authority of judgment. Names are never forgotten. I woke with blood on my tongue, the taste of iron too sharp to be imagined. From that moment, routine no longer anchored me. Every stamp, every report, every ledger entry felt hollow. The files spoke of closure, but the wing had spoken of continuation. And somewhere in the Vatican, among its endless basements and locked chambers, something had begun to balance the accounts in ways no human prefect could edit. Sleep no longer offered rest. Every time I closed my eyes, the same image returned. The wing, luminous and suffocating, reaching into places I should not have entered. By the 4th night, I stopped trying to fight it. I sat awake instead, staring at the cracked ceiling of my quarters and listening to the cathedral bells toll hours I wished would pass faster. But exhaustion does not ask for permission, it forces itself in. When I woke at dawn, I found something that had not been there before. The mirror above my washbasin had changed. It was old, clouded with age, but now its silver backing was warped as if heat had bent it. The surface rippled faintly, like disturbed water. First I blamed fatigue. Then I leaned closer. That is when I saw the shapes. They were not reflections. They were impressions, faint outlines pressed into the glass from within. Hands, perhaps, though not human. Too long. Too narrow. Wings, too, stretching toward the edges of the frame. And in the very center, letters scrawled across the misted surface. Though the room was dry, you are already chosen. I stumbled back so hard that I struck my shoulder against the bed frame. My breathing turned shallow, and yet I could not look away. The letters dissolved, but the impressions remained, as though the glass itself had become a canvas for something watching me from the other side. I reached for my rosary, the one gift my mother had pressed into my palm before I left Naples. The beads felt warm, almost too warm, as though clutched by another hand before mine. That day, nothing in the Vatican felt ordinary. Guards passed in the hall with blank faces, but their eyes flicked toward me longer than before. Priests murmured at their benches, yet their prayers carried an undercurrent of unease. Even Pietro grew quieter. When I asked about room 99, he finally broke his silence. His lips thinned before he whispered, "You should never have looked at the glass." I demanded more, but he only slipped a folded note into my pocket before disappearing into the crowd. Hours later, behind the locked door of my quarters, I unfolded it. There were no words, only a crude sketch of a feather, one side white, the other darkened with ash. Beneath it, a number, 72. That night I covered the mirror with a blanket. It did not help. The glass pulsed beneath the fabric, faintly glowing, as though something inside sought release. I dreamt of corridors again, but now there were more voices. Whispers in Latin and Greek, some reciting scripture, others chanting phrases I could not translate. Each time I turned in the dream, I caught a glimpse of wings against the walls, brushing the plaster like shadows of executions. Long carried out. When I woke, the blanket had fallen to the floor. The mirror stood uncovered, and there was no reflection of me at all, only the faint outline of that same feather waiting. The Vatican's archives are endless. I had patrolled their corridors often, but only the surface layers, the ones filled with the sanctioned histories. Rows of illuminated manuscripts, sealed reliquaries, and portraits of cardinals no one remembered. Beneath those floors lay darker wings, one spoken of only in rumor. That was where I needed to go if I wanted to know what 72 meant. Pietro's note burned in my pocket like a coal. I felt the weight of it every step I took down the stairwells, further than I was ever supposed to venture. The stone grew colder as I descended, the lamps fewer. By the time I reached the 6th level below ground, I had to light my own candle. Its flame struggled against the damp air, flickering as though unseen mouths exhaled from the darkness. I found the chamber by accident. A rusted iron door, smaller than the rest, sealed with wax sigils that should have kept anyone away. But my name had already been whispered by a mirror. I was past obedience. I pressed my palm against the seal. It gave way with a sound like tearing flesh. Inside, the air was heavy with the stench of old smoke and mildew. Shelves buckled under the weight of scrolls bound in leather too dry to be animal, too dark to be natural. And there, on a cracked marble pedestal, lay a single manuscript, marked on its spine with the number 72. My candle guttered. I forced myself to open the cover. The text was a mixture of Latin, Hebrew, and something that slithered across the page in glyphs I had never seen. Between them were sketches, feathers blackened at the tips, eyes staring from within circles of flame, and diagrams of wings bound by chains. At the margin of one page, a note in Italian, written in a hurried hand. Do not trust the shining ones. They lie with light. The words struck me like a blow. Angels were not meant to deceive. That was doctrine, unshakable, eternal. And yet, whoever had written this, someone trusted enough to leave notes in the Vatican's forbidden archives, believed otherwise. Then I saw it. At the center of the manuscript, drawn in painstaking detail, was a map of the basements. Every numbered chamber was accounted for except one. Room 99 was circled in red ink, with a line connecting it to a phrase in Latin. Custodia cadentium. The prison of the fallen. My breath quickened. It explained everything. The guards, the warnings, Pietro's fear. Room 99 was not a room at all. It was a cell. As I traced the ink with my finger, the candle dimmed again. But this time it was not the damp. A presence filled the chamber, pressing against the walls. I heard the faint scrape of wings, not from above but from behind the shelves. A whisper followed, curling against my ear, though no lips formed it. You read what was never yours. Now you belong to the Count. The flame snuffed out. The darkness was absolute, yet I still saw it. The faint outline of a feather, burning in the air before me, its tip dripping ash. When the candle went out, the darkness was not simply absence of light. It had substance. It pressed against my skin, filled my throat, weighed on my chest. Yet the feather still glowed faintly in front of me, suspended in midair like a coal torn from a dying fire. Its glow pulsed with every beat of my heart. I staggered back, but the shelves groaned as if shifting closer. The air carried the faint rustle of wings, but wrong somehow, jagged, broken, like bones scraping against stone. I clutched the manuscript. Its cover felt alive, warm like skin. I could not see my hand, but the manuscript burned in my hands, the ink bleeding across its pages as if it was alive, forming new sentences that were not there before. The feather hovered just above it, the light so bright now that the shelves around me looked like the ribs of some colossal skeleton. I read the words aloud before I realized I had spoken. The hunter becomes the hunted. The killer becomes the witness. The contract is eternal. The vault trembled. The chains around the hidden door split, clattering onto the stone floor like rain. Beyond the opening, I glimpsed a staircase spiraling downward, deeper than the foundations of Rome. Voices rose from below, chanting in a language older than Latin. I recognized one of the voices. It was mine. I stumbled back, shaking, but the manuscript forced my eyes to the page again. Every name I had killed was written there. Every soul I had sent into silence stared back, ink carved into their true forms. And at the very bottom, beneath them all, a blank line waited. My name began to write itself. I dropped the book, but it clung to my fingers like tar. The feather lashed down, piercing into its spine, and the glow filled the chamber until I could no longer see stone or shelves, only wings, countless wings stretching in every direction, some radiant, others twisted into monstrous shapes. Then I understood. I had not been a soldier for the Vatican. I had been bait. Every hit I carried out fed a war no one was meant to survive. The angels were not hunting me to punish me. They were hunting me to claim what I had gathered. I tore at the manuscript, trying to rip the page, but the parchment resisted. The voices grew louder. The door swung open fully, and something began climbing the staircase. Its light was blinding, but within it I saw the outline of a figure. Not a demon, not an angel. Something between, something born of every strike I had carried out. I realized then the truth the Vatican had hidden, the truth I was never meant to discover. I had not killed for God. I had been writing scripture in blood for something else. The feather dimmed. The book closed on its own, sealing my name inside. And the figure in the light whispered, in my own voice, "Your contract is fulfilled." The chamber collapsed into silence. But I am still writing this, which means I never truly left that place.